and can be used in classrooms, in districts, in data teams, in athletic teams to do amazing things. But one of the neat ways where we could look at really the integration of the apps as a suite as a publishing platform, and in this case for student newspapers. Months ago in the chat window, I posted a link to a survey just to get an idea of how many people actually still have student newspapers in their school districts. If you have a moment, click that link and take the survey, and we'll take a peek at those results at the end of a very short slide presentation before we actually get into looking at the actual site and setting up the details and the configuration for as a student newspaper. Here, survey a second time if you don't see it in the chat window, and I'll set that up for just a moment. Using that address, I'm really building on the work that Andy Crozier did. And let me here. Never see.
Yeah, Rachel.
Okay, great. Thanks, Becky. Back to full screen again. And really started talking about using Google Sites last week. He's another Google certified trainer. And we got a really good high-level overview as well as some really good examples and ways that you can create pages and embed content. And we're to go just a couple of steps further today. Newspapers used to be like the newspapers that we see on the street corners or in the newspaper boxes at McDonald's or in the bank or in the shopping mall. They were newsprint-based papers. They were usually created by a journalism class. Usually there was a teacher or a kind of head editor who was in charge. And most setups included reporters, editors, photographers, even typesetters. I am kind of one of those people. I bridge the gap between having to actually do some editing and typesetting on what used to be the old typesetting forms and using computers for that. So now, obviously, we would do that all on the computer. And then usually they were delivered at lunch, or you had students who would go out during homeroom period and deliver papers at the homerooms, and it would essentially it was news of the school. I think as we look at using Google Apps or online tools to be our student newspaper platform, that we're changing too much of that. We're really affecting the delivery vehicle, taking it from newsprint to an online format. But we still can do this in a journalism class. We can still have reporters, editors, photographers, typesetters. We still probably need some cameras and some equipment. Still possibly do delivery at lunch. Obviously, this changes the model to a 24-hour delivery. They have a couple of dedicated terminals in the library or at lunch where the home page of the browser would be newspaper. I know in our districts right now we are facing severe budget cuts across the state, much as I think everyone is. And of being able to save money if you still are printing a paper version of your student newspaper, the idea of the paper use, the ink use, the press fees that you might pay if you have it printed off-site, which I believe most schools do now. The savings are real, and they allow us to do some of those extra things that we need, like cameras, and being to retain the journalism teacher to be able to host the student newspaper. For education, we have really the bulk of tools that we need to be able to publish a student newspaper. Websites, which allows us to create static pages as well as announcement pages, which allow for almost like a blog type of story creation. Groups, which could be used for the communication among your newspaper staff and your newspaper class. We have Google Docs for collaborative reporting and editing. We have forms for maybe public opinion polls or student opinion polls. And then Google Calendar, which you can use, again, internally as one of your own administrative tools, and then also embed a public calendar, a school calendar, in your student newspaper site. And Casa and YouTube for media. Okay, I'm going to go back. I see Becky's note that we need the link one last time, so I am going to actually paste it here in the chat window. In just a moment. Not critically important. It just is gives us an overview of how many schools are actually still creating and publishing student newspapers. As in creating a sample student newspaper and looking at other newspapers that are available online that have been created in Google Sites and with Google Apps, keeping kind of a balance sheet of the pros and cons of using Google Apps for this type of platform. And right now, as my beginning list, the ease of use, which in most cases is very low or next to nothing or free, and extending are the three biggest pros as I see them. But of cons, and ones that I've been struggling with, and in the introduction to this segment, in the paragraph that was written about it, I talked about really kind of comparing Blogger and Google Apps/Google Sites as a platform. I think one of the good parts about using Google Sites is archiving, because there's not a built-in method for being able to kind of capture what's on a page on a given day or at a given time. And I think Blogger might be a better tool if you're really wanting to create fixed archives. So let's say you have specific issues and volumes and issues of your newspaper, and you want to be able to capture those. I think the tagging in Blogger allows you to do that a little bit more easily. And then with the design, I certainly think you can put together designs on Google Sites, and you can make it visually appealing, and you can lay them out in all sorts of different fashions. But there really aren't a lot of tools where you can kind of the skeleton of the site. You can do some HTML in the body of the pages, but you are limited to the set of tools in the actual editing palette for the site itself. So kind of my initial on the pros and cons, and I thought we'd take just a minute here. If you have others to add, if you'll add them in the chat window, we'll do just a little bit of sharing as we're going, and then we'll transition into our sample site. Thank you, Paul. Paul added that the wider audience when online is a great pro of using the Google platform. Paper, you really, if you are still doing a print version, you're really who receives that in person. And even if you are doing an online version, one of the beauties of Google is being able to allow editors to be doing just that, editing on the site, but then have the site itself be public, and having to worry about just publishing something on your network, maybe docs in the past that were just shared in a U drive or in a shared folder on a, let's say, a Windows system. With that, we're going to head over to our sample site, and we'll copy and paste this URL into the chat window also. If you want to go along, please. before there, we'll take a quick look at our form just to see what it looks like office-wise for papers. Right now, most of our audience, or half of our audience, does work in a middle school or a high school. And a fair number have a student newspaper currently in print. So this is actually perfect for this session because we'll kind of look at some of the possibilities in online. Okay, one for submitting your answers on the form. And sample site, and I'm going to head to the home page. This is very basic. I keep the design fairly uncluttered and clean so that we could work in it today. And this is a completely made up high school, Valley High School. Actually, I shouldn't say completely made up. I'm sure there are some Valley High Schools around the United States, but mine is made up. Falcon newspaper. The Falcons are their mascot. So for those who are with us who are really just beginning with apps, the way I did this was in domain, I list of sites and clicked Create New Site. I hit values, find it the URL that's inside domain. The simple theme, which is the one that's really nice and easy to build on. And ours, I made it public so that everyone could see it. Pretty easy process for setting up a site. To create site, I'm not going to right now. And think about, it might have taken 30 seconds and created. Benefits to Google Sites. You can also add some URL. So we're not going to walk through the step-by-step on this today, but if I had a URL, let's say falconnews.org or falconnews.net, I could put that domain name, or let's say I have that domain name, and actually map that domain name to the site. I do not have to use the sites.google.com to drive my traffic to my site. I can have an easy-to-use URL. We have just a few pre-built pages. I have a page which is donated, kind of the above the fold is usually going to be a large photo or large headline. Kind of an in this issue table of contents across down the left. We do a Twitter stream on the right-hand side. Advertising at the front page. And you could add, especially if you have students on your staff who are wanting graphic design, or they're wanting to do marketing, wanting to do creation or kind of communications. This is one of the ways that they can really be effective in newspaper staff. There's a whole area, I think, that we have someone on staff actually creating little graphic elements for your newspaper. It just makes it look that much nicer. A very simple home page. We're going to do a tour of what's already here. We use page, and in this case, I've chosen page as an announcements template, and we'll actually walk through that in a few minutes. What allows us to do is, again, set it up in almost like a blog format where the articles are printed, and then you click on individual items to see the articles. We did calendar. It's the school calendar. And see items that have been added to the school calendar. case, we even have a link to about the football game against the Bears. In this section, I've kind of made a placeholder for our clubs. We have sports, and in this case, I just have a couple of fall sports added in. You could see, you can volleyball, your football. I haven't added cross country or any of the other fall sports yet, but you could have their schedule. You could have links to their team pages, rosters. The possibilities are fairly endless. And then I don't know if Andy's on this webinar or not, but as I was sitting and listening to Andy 2 weeks ago, he gave us inspiration that one of the neat pages that I don't think gets used very often in Google Sites is list page. And so lightning bolt struck 2 weeks ago, and I thought, what a great idea for your box scores. And walk through that in just a couple of minutes on how you would do that. But with the scores now, have list format, I can sort them by sport, by football grouped together. I get my scores by date and the activity as it progresses. I group things by opponent, by score, or by our wins and losses. So I was actually really excited. That was one of the first things that really fell together for this sample newspaper, was being able to use a list page for box scores. Having done box score setting in high school journalism, I can tell you this was a lot easier to do. At your Unity page, you could do restaurant reviews, movie reviews, and again, this is just a placeholder here. And then is your editorial page. And again, in this case, I've set it up as an announcements page where you can have a historical list, a blog format of the latest opinion or the latest editorial on top. Photo albums, and you can import slideshows from Picasa. Here, I think we've got some marching band and some of the newspaper highlights in the slideshows. You set them up maybe by issue, by month, by season, by event. I think the possibilities there are pretty endless as well. For About section, you obviously have information about your newspaper staff. You have advertising information for, the donut shop or for the movie store or whatever it is in town. You could have a form that you set up for them to advertising. And you could even provide some, graphic design services and things along those lines. So I've given you an idea of what you could do with a Google site. I'm going to walk through actually some of the how-to. So in our new page, I'm going to use it as our example. That we mentioned the page template announcements. To do, let's say I wanted to set up a freshman news page, create page, and my site that I've set up. I'm going to name. Giving announcements template is it scrolls those articles. In this case, I'm going to put this page under news. And I'm going to click to create my page. And I would create my post. Actually saved some text here so that we could use it. We could just flip back and forth really easily. And paste in and save. That's just how easy it is. And Rob, I do not have it created as a template yet, but I can definitely do that. So I just made a note to myself. Thanks, good idea. In this case, really, in these types, we don't really need to let folks add attachments. So anytime, once you've created a page or an article, you can and look in at those page settings and uncheck the allow attachments, save them, and you'll see that now we just have the option to comment. A great job. And add comment, but allowing anyone to add attachments. Now, we did that news. We added freshman news. We put our news heading, but you see that it's not dropping down. And I to use that as our segue to the horizontal navigation. And that's one of the items that in the 2 weeks ago, if you were with us, and we really got to touch on it, but we didn't get to look at it too closely. So what we're going to do is hop up to our Actions button. Again, you're working in your Google site. For those who are new with us, there are 3 main buttons that we're going to use anytime we're wanting to edit. Create a page, edit page, and then all the hidden tools under More Actions. In this case, Manage Site, and we're going to talk about the site layout. We have a horizontal navigation bar, and I'm going to edit that to add our news and main categories that we saw across the horizontal navigation. To add my page that I just added, here under News, okay. You see tossed it in the bottom of the list here. Just going up a news, and knock it in one notch, and there we go. Next times when you're using the kind of default vertical navigation, you can set it up where it's doing automatic navigation for you. The horizontal navigation, you do just a little bit of extra work, but I think it looks nicer in a lot of the situations where we're using sites. And for Rob and for Sherry, yes, it's fairly new, and I just showed you how to do some of the configuration on it, and now I'll show you that if we go to, let's get this on the first try, there we go. Again, we're still in site layout, and if I click the Change Site Layout button, when you set up your site, the horizontal navigation bar is unchecked. And as when I checked that, it automatically transferred my navigation from the left-hand side, kind of the default look like we see in the settings, navigation bar that we see on the sample site. You're right, go Google. Once we've made those changes, I'm going to make sure that I clicked Save and return to site. Now we that freshman news is now a subcategory of our news category. So at a few minutes time, we've been able to navigation items and repersonalize our news for our students. I'm back one last time to the site. In that horizontal navigation, when you turn it on, it's the default kind of blue and white, not very attractive horizontal navigation. Done is they've added the ability to be able to change your colors. Similar to what we've always seen in the site, you have the ability to change your background colors and your text colors, your head colors if you're not using an image, content area, and notice at the very bottom, the newest section is horizontal navigation. What I want to point out is that your text color is that is the links. So notice it's kind of a light gray color. You can also set the hover text color. So let's say if you have a light gray background on your current page or color on your static that you're going to roll over, you can make those flip-flop so that as folks are navigating, they have the clues for what's active and where they are currently. It comes in with the selected text and selected background color. The page that you're on is selected. I'm going to cancel out of here so we can actually see that in action again. But that's where that navigation style is where the color and fonts in site last time. Color and fonts. Where all the stuff is as far as design. My colors and fonts, I had set some custom colors where my current, the page that I'm actually on, is gray, blue text. The pages that are active links or that can be selected are the blue with the white text. I want to think about contrast for your readers and things like using green and red. Not that you would do that design-wise anyway, but if you were to use green and red, your text and your background, anyone who's colorblind in the green-red spectrum, that wouldn't work very well for them. So that's my kind of follow-up to Andy's introduction of horizontal navigation. And now I'm going to take just the last few minutes before we leave some time for questions and answers in actually embedding some of the tools that we talked about earlier when I talked about the fact that one of the nice things about the Google Apps platform is that we do have this kind of extensible list of tools that we can use in our site. So let's go. I'm going to start with YouTube and embedding a video. So I'm opinion, my editorial here, that the student parking lot is a hazard. While I'm sure this student has done a nice job writing, one of the things we know about websites and the transition to online media, whether it be newspapers, blogs, general websites, is a page full of text is not really the medium in which we're trying to transmit information effectively, or it's not the most effective way for us to transmit information. So can add a photo, a video, something to add not only a graphic element, but also kind of telling the story in another way. So we're going to get to this individual article. This itself, if I were to edit page here, this is kind of the container, the big container for the opinion page. So I click on this article itself, edit page. And article, I've asked the student to make just a little more user-friendly, a little more meaningful for our readers. And my student has found a YouTube clip of a car burn out the school parking lot. An example of, let's pretend that this actually happened at Valley High School. What to do here is insert video. And again, to make sure that you're with me where it is in the menu. I'm going to do a YouTube video. If you allow Google Videos on your domain, you can actually also use Google Video. And click back over to the Thunderbird and copy URL. Going to additional time. So I think the URL of my YouTube video. I'm going to go ahead and keep a border around it, but I'm not going to include a title. And I click Save, and you see the YouTube video in. Design-wise, that doesn't really work for me, so I'd like to do it after the text around it, so we have a nice layout on the page. So I'm going to keep it aligned to the left, but I turn my text wrap on. Oh, much better. So now I'm going to click Save. And view this editorial. Not only do I have the nice work that the student has done on an argument, but I have the video to go along with it. Similarly, let's take a look at our news with photos that's already existing. So I'm going to edit, and you'll see similar to that video insert that we just did. We have to align it to the left, center, or right. We can make photo different sizes. Even if you have a large original, you could actually go very large. And then text wrap. Photo to link somewhere, then just the default is actually the photo link on site where the photo is stored. But if you wanted it to link out to a site, a news clip, something along those lines, you could set the link there by clicking the change and entering the correct URL. And then you click Save. Oh, see, I did change the size. So this is a great example. Let's go back in and edit again. And we'll make it just a little bit nicer as far as fitting in the page. And click Save. And there's a photo that goes along with our article about the state football championship. Questions. I see Rob's question about comment feature. On the comment side, this would be another one of those areas where Blogger might be, depending on your setup for your school, Blogger might be a tool that if you want a really robust comment discussion section on a website, I want to consider that rather than Google Sites, because it is commenting in the sites is limited to the people who have access. So it's not the same as being able to comment publicly. And then the Falcon News, this banner here, Karen asks at banner up at the top, and let me walk through that. In options, we were on Manage Site, which is where all the setting and site setup is. If we go to that, again, we're down at the bottom in Site Appearance, which is where all of the kind of graphic design and layout tools are. If we go to Site Layout, the header area is that's Change Logo. When on that, we didn't have a logo. It just had text that said Falcon News. And so I created a logo with the graphics that I wanted, a custom logo, and then I chose the file and click OK, and edit it as the banner for my site. Steve asks, subscribing to the Rss feed. Let's back. In a section, you see the subscribe to posts here. This here is obviously just a pure XML dump, and I apologize that I wasn't including this actual presentation for today, but you can actually set up Feedburner which is part of the new domain tools. Let's take a quick peek. We'll bunny just a little bit. Let's go there. I might be signed out already in our domain, but let's get back in. And to look at services. And Becky may know the answer to this without, yes, Feedburner is one of the new tools included for the Google Apps domains. So the best advice I would have for setting up a feed for your students to subscribe, whether it be in Google Reader. In Google Reader, obviously, they can just use their Google Reader as the tool. But for RSS, I would set up a Feedburner account for a newspaper, and I would add those XML feeds to your Feedburner account. And Jordan has a question about using this for smaller schools. Apologize, Jordan is, I'm not sure, I have a friend who is a female Jordan and a friend who's a male Jordan. So Jordan's school has about 400 students. I think this would still be a great platform even for smaller schools. Thanks, Jordan. Jordan's school, his school, is about 400 students, and I think there are reasons why using a site template or a site platform, a Google site platform for a small school would work. A lot of that centers around, again, the budgets that we're facing and the fact that with Google Sites, if you have a domain at your school and you have a, let's say you don't have a journalism class, you have an English class and you have a teacher who's willing to be kind of an advisor for a student newspaper, I think a low barrier to tech skills required to be able to deploy a site on this platform. It's something where you have to go out and either buy expensive technology or someone with specific technology skills to be able to set up and deploy. So Jordan, I think would be great small schools as well as large schools, and in fact I might even go so far as to say that it's even suited for small schools, large schools. Again, because of some of those limitations. I work in rural areas and we face those limitations every day. So as a question, and I apologize, Becky, I was talking to Becky earlier today and I said, I'll let you do the moderating of the chat window, and here I am looking at the chat window. So Sherry has said that she says her student site is private, and if students are allowed to make public sites, does the Google admin receive notice of all sites created with subscribed so this can be monitored? Usually, that's a great question and for the group. You can see if you're an administrator on the domain, you see the public sites on the domain. But there is that option when we set up a new site, and feel free to chime in at any point, Becky.
So right now, we do not give notifications to an administrator whenever a site is created. So if you just want to make public your domain only, then you should just keep that in place. But Rachel, do you have more on your presentation to go?
Really just kind of talking a little bit about the calendar and a couple extra tools, but it looks like the questions I don't want to run out of time for the questions, so I don't mind giving that up to talk about some of these issues.
Okay, we'll have some time at the end, so why don't you finish your presentation and then we'll go through the question and answers that we have.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks.
And go ahead and just leave Sherry with the idea that with a new site, if your students are creating sites, they do have the option to only allow the people who they specify to view the site. So, while you can make it everybody, you can also make it more closed. And there are options there. To our Falcon News. The last two things to talk about is embedded calendar. And those folks who are pretty advanced in their usage of Google Apps, this won't be anything new for you, but those who are fairly new to this, in your Google Apps domain, have a calendar. Within that calendar, you set up multiple subfolders. And you see here that I've created one that's for news for this sample newspaper site. I'm going to show the month view. You can see that I had added a few items so that we would be able to see what it looked like. Break. We have the parade. The marching band is in the Thanksgiving parade. And we have items next week. And to embed that on the site, this calendar. And when I share this calendar, I actually come to a page that allows me to share it with specific people. But if I'm really wanting to embed it on a website, I calendar details and pull embed code. The about sites is that. Let me get to our page. You saw it as it was. I can do the same thing with insert menu. Calendar is one of the items that you can insert in Google site. I do that and with a list of the calendars I have in my Google Calendar. There's Falcon News, and I select it and then select display items and in the page. A couple of quick ways to share a public calendar on your site. The last part that I wanted to talk about is, and we'll use the club page to do this, about this presentation with Google Form. And that form we used as a small survey, and we could view the results. And we do the same for our student paper, with polls on anything. We'd like to see lunch menu for the second half of the year. What do you, the principal, what do you think Mr. Johnson should dress up as for Spirit Week if we win our challenge? Obviously, the policies are vast in set form, using them as kind of input and communication devices with your students. And similar to what we just saw with the calendar and the YouTube video and images, Spreadsheet Form is an option in your menu. It happens where when I click Insert Spreadsheet Form, I have a list of my spreadsheet forms that are presented, and I can just click on it. I don't really want a border, but I will include the title and to link so that it's 100% width, and save. And you'll have the gadget peppers, and I think I'm going to center it this time. And then save. And the form embed in our site. And if I want folks to see the responses, they can view the summary of responses again without ever leaving your student's paper site. And that's really, I wanted to make sure to give 15 to 20 minutes for questions, so that's really where I had planned to end today. And I think we'll go ahead and we'll let Becky moderate and get some of these questions answered.
Great. So we have one question from Steve Thor, who wants to know, will you set up a new site for each edition of the newspaper that comes out?
Oh, wow. You know, that's actually an idea for that archive issue. I think there would be some trade-off, and I think this would be a great place for other people to chime in also, because this is just my personal opinion. I could really see it of newspaper as a site itself, and allowing content to, whether it be through the announcements page, whether it be through the list page that has a running history of your box scores for your sports, whether it be just to kind of see what's been happening over the past months in the school without actually having to access individual sites. I think that would probably be my personal preference, that I would still keep it in one container to figure out strategic ways for creating kind of content and what is current content. But again, if you're really looking to create, especially, I could really see where that would come into play. Let's say if you're doing a literary journal and you only do it maybe 2, 3, 4 times a year. In a situation, I think I would be much more excited about the idea of being able to just create a new site for each of those issues. But for the newspaper itself, I think I might keep the single container and the announcements page as often as possible to be able to keep a running content.
So we have another question that wants to know if this is specific to forms, if you can create if-then statements that direct students to various parts of a form.
I actually did that in the survey that we started with. Let me minimize my chat windows so I can actually get to my tool. And I'm going to refresh this club page. And we'll do this a couple of times, what it looks like on the front end, and then we'll take a peek at the back end. So the first question was, do you work in a middle school or high school? And if I click no and continue, I didn't need any other information from the folks who didn't work in a middle school or high school. So I just thanks, emit, relax, entered with the confirmation message, and again, still to see the previous responses. So now let's say I'm into this form or this survey, and I say, yes, I work in a middle school or a high school, and I click continue, and aha, since I said yes, I wanted to know more information from those of you who worked in a school. So does your school have a student newspaper? And again, we'll start with no, and if I say no, then thanks, that's all I needed to know. Still information message. So now last time, yes, I work in a middle school or a high school, and yes, we do have a newspaper. In case I really had to find out how many folks were still printing paper newspapers versus had online newspapers. And for one of those options, the person chose, sent them to the thank you and to the click submit and enjoy the webinar. So let's take a look at the back end on that. This is my spreadsheet attached to it, and I actually want to edit the form. My form. I see, or someone can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe what I did on the logic is I think multiple choice is the only option right now for setting up conditional logic. Yep. In this case, that first question was, do you work in a middle school or high school? And I chose multiple choice, so I could say yes or no. And I clicked the page based on answer. So you said yes, I wanted you to go to the second page of the form, and you'll see that page 2 is, does your school have a student newspaper? Page 3 is newspaper print online. And 4 is that thank you message that we saw over and over again. So for question 1, if you said yes, you went to the follow-up question on page 2. But if no, you went straight to the thank you page 4. And the same for the next question. I chose multiple choice. if you selected yes, that you do have a newspaper, I sent you to page 3 for the follow-up question, and if you said no, I sent you straight to the thank you page. And then the last question, the same. If you had, in this case, both of them took you to the same spot, so I really didn't need to say go to page based on answer, but as I was building it, I wasn't sure if I would have another page or not, so I went ahead and built that in. And in both of those situations, it takes you to the last page, which is thank you. And that I was able to, for the multiple choice, the conditional logic, for it to work, you actually need to have people to, and that it's under add item, you do each break, and then you drag and drop those as instead of conditional logic. I hope that answers the question.
Yep, that's perfect. I even learned something new.
Oh, great.
So we have another question. So if the session is being recorded, and we will send you the URL after the session, so you can have, all this great information that Rachel shared. The question is, can I use all of this if my school does not use Google Apps, but they've created, a website using Google Sites, Docs, and Gmail?
If you're asking as a teacher or a student, I don't want to go against what the policy is in your district, but so the part's separate, but from the technology side, I believe that everything I have on this template, and let me take a quick peek just to make sure I'm not turn, I think I could have done inside of my Gmail account. So I believe that yes, if you do not have access to a Google Apps for Education domain yet, that because I think most of will sometime in the near future. It looks like on this template at least I've done things that you could do inside of a public Gmail account also.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, they're the same functionality in the public Gmail accounts. The only difference is that it's not customized for your domain. So if you want to share the site just among people in your domain, you won't be able to do that. Or if you, need to look up addresses in a global address list, or you have docs that are shared just among people in your domain that you want to embed, then that will be virtually impossible without having a school Google Apps account. But the functionality is still in place. The share settings are just a little bit different. Great. So Anne Dawson asks, how can you make a calendar show up under My Calendars as opposed to being in other calendars?
Okay, and let me actually go to, there we go, calendar. And let's say a couple of different options, and I apologize, Anne, I'm going to go ahead and answer two separate ways. One of the easiest ways is, let's say if I'm at my school newspaper and I'm on a calendar, I think fairly default, and I apologize, the WebEx is, the web control is right in my way. And at the bottom of the Google Calendars, there's always an option to subscribe to a Google Calendar. So if you're, again, someone publicly visiting a site, that's probably your easiest option. And if you're in an apps domain, My Calendars, and a little button underneath that says Add. And let's see, I actually, don't want to add a new calendar of my own. I keep moving my controls back and forth. So other calendars, there's a link that says Add. Actually, Google Calendars would be a great session in and of itself because of the interesting calendars alone. Let's say I wanted to add a coworker's calendar, or I had the web address for a calendar. I click, and let's say I see Paul on, Paul is one of my coworkers, and it looks like I already have his on here, but I'm going to still try again here. That I don't have access if Paul actually was doing something. These are kind of our state level accounts. These are not our individual Google accounts that we're looking at. But if Paul had in calendar, it would show up on this view in the gold color. What, Ann? And answers, I see that a few lines up in the chat window, Rob had a great idea and really maybe creating like sub-pages for your archives and moving content to those sub-pages. So let's say let's look at our site, and the way I have it set up, on the page you see that this is Volume 1, Issue 23. And so one of the ways to strategize around this is you could set up an archive per volume, let's say. And so maybe you have like 25 issues per volume. And at the end of that volume, you can create a Volume 1 archive. And I think that's a beautiful idea. You could set up a new page or a sub-page that's an archive, and you could move that content from those first 25 issues to that location. Great. Yeah, that'd be good.
Great. Well, we are running out of time, but I want to leave room for, one more question. If someone has a burning question, feel free to ask it in the chat window. If not, I just want to remind you guys that this webinar is being recorded, and I will email out the link to the recorded webinar and the transcript of the question and answer session, so that you guys will have all that information in your inbox and easily accessible. Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. We will be hosting another webinar 2 weeks from today on taking the core features in Google Apps to the next level. So we hope you guys can join us then. Look up for the invitation on our webinar calendar, and we hope to see you again in 2 weeks. Thanks again, Rachel, for doing a great job. It was super helpful. I learned, a ton of new stuff about Google Sites and using it for student newspapers, and we really appreciate you being here.
All right, thank you.